Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all our Sip&Talkers out there, wherever you are. Welcome back.
Great to be here.
You know, I was thinking, have you ever noticed how some questions aren't really about getting information? They're more like demands for reassurance.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that classic, do you love me? The person asking, they probably know the answer, but they have this need to hear it every single day. Just to manage some deep insecurity.
That's a really sharp way to put it. You're cutting right to the heart of what we're looking at today.
Am I?
Yeah. When we see, for example, Chinese officials in Japan repeatedly pressing their counterparts about Taiwan's sovereignty, about the 1972 communique, in political science, that's not really a question. It's not an information-seeking exercise. It's what we'd call a pressure test.
A pressure test.
Right, yeah.
It just seems so contradictory. I'm looking at my coffee mug right here. If this coffee is mine, it's mine. I don't need anyone's permission.
You just drink it.
I just drink it. Why would I lean over to my neighbor and ask, hey, do you acknowledge and affirm that this coffee cup is my inalienable property? It's absurd.
It is. It absolutely is. And that contradiction, that's the foundation of our whole conversation today. We're really going to explore this tension between what's called de jure sovereignty.
The legal claim, the thing on paper.
That's on paper, exactly. And de facto sovereignty, the physical, on-the-ground reality of who's actually in control, who's running the show. And analyses from places like foreign policy point out that this kind of behavior, this constant asking, it shows a huge cognitive gap.
A gap.
A gap between what international law sort of implies and the messy, uncooperative reality of the situation.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission for this talk is to figure out why constantly emphasizing something, shouting it from the rooftops, often signals this deep internal uncertainty, what some are calling legitimacy anxiety.
Right. If you have to yell it every day, maybe you don't quite believe it yourself.
And we're going to do a little thought experiment later, which I think everyone's going to love. What happens if the whole world just gives in? If everyone says, okay, fine, yes, it's all yours, Taiwan, the U.S., Mars, whatever you want.
What is the political and psychological cost of that kind of, let's call it ultimate compliance?
Like humoring a toddler who says he owns the sun.
Precisely. And that all leads to our final idea, a psychological framework we're calling the basement theory. It looks at the incredible cost of defining your own happiness and stability through confinement.
Okay, grab your coffee. This is going to be a good one. All right, let's start at the beginning. Why the repetitive question? I mean, when we look at the situation with Taiwan, it's pretty clear. It has its own government, its own currency, its own military, a constitution. So the demand for someone else to reaffirm China's claim feels, I don't know, almost like a ritual.
It is absolutely a ritual, and you have to understand it as a performance. That's the key. Diplomatic observers will tell you the act itself is not about gathering new intelligence.
Because they already know Japan's position. Everyone knows everyone's position.
Exactly. Nothing new is learned. It's about a performance of sovereignty. It's like a political liturgy. It has to be repeated for the sake of the repetition itself. And this performance, it serves a few different functions depending on who's watching.
Okay, so let's break that down. Who's the first audience? The internal one.
Let's start there. For the internal audience in China, for the official media like People's Daily or Xinhua, this is framed as a core diplomatic duty. It's non-negotiable. By constantly forcing foreign governments to go on the record and repeat their commitment to the one China principle, they're essentially controlling the script.
So it's about controlling the language of the conversation.
It's about ensuring that everyone sticks to the Beijing-defined track. It stops any dangerous ambiguity from creeping into the official record. It's a way of policing the diplomatic vocabulary.
So it's less about convincing the world and more about just keeping everyone on script. But, you know, as outside observers point out, all this pushing actually points to something much deeper, something way more insecure, this legitimacy anxiety.
And that's where the analysis from places like the New York Times or The Economist really comes in handy. Their reporting suggests that, look, if Taiwan were truly under Beijing's total control, if they ran the government, the military, the economy,
then you wouldn't need to ask.
You wouldn't need to ask. The questions would be completely redundant. Why would you beg for a verbal confirmation when you already have the physical reality?
It brings me back to that relationship analogy. You know, if someone is really your partner, They're sitting next to you. They're part of your life. If you have to keep dragging them into conversations with the neighbors just to prove the relationship is real,
then it probably isn't in a functional sense. And that analogy just nails the core problem. The anxiety comes from that undeniable reality on the ground. Taiwan has an independent constitution. It has a self-governing structure, its own military. So the act of demanding this verbal recognition, it becomes a substitute.
a substitute for what they don't have.
It's a psychological and diplomatic substitute for actual physical control. It's like you're trying to use words to fill a very real, very tangible vacuum of power. It's trying to hypnotize yourself and the world into believing something is real when the facts on the ground say otherwise.
So the louder the question, the wider the gap between the claim and the reality.
And you touched on something really important there about the audience. Very often, the true audience isn't even the foreign official they're grilling. It's the people back home.
The output to domestic sales model.
That's it. Think about how this plays out online.
Right.
Footage of a Chinese reporter strictly questioning or aggressively challenging a Japanese or American official. This stuff goes viral on Weibo or Douyin. It generates massive traffic, huge emotional engagement.
And it serves a political purpose. It makes the government look strong.
Vitally important. It reinforces the domestic narrative that their leaders are out there on the world stage, tirelessly and assertively defending China's core interests. It projects this image of unwavering strength.
Even if the answer they get is, a totally vague, non-committal, diplomatic nothing burger.
It doesn't matter. The footage can be clipped, edited, framed. The victory is in the asking, not the answer. The internal narrative always takes priority over the external diplomatic reality.
This whole dynamic, it just screams of a kind of psychological phenomenon. We were calling it the imposter syndrome of the state.
That's a perfect term for it.
We all feel it, right?
Yeah.
You get a new job and you think, oh, God, they're going to find out I have no idea what I'm doing. But for a state to feel that and to demand constant validation,
it becomes this extreme political version of what sociologists sometimes call a collective fiction. It's this high-stakes, exhausting game where the unspoken rule is, I know you know I'm not fully in control, but you have to play along with my story.
that sounds incredibly stressful.
Imagine being that person who claims they're the richest man in the world when they're actually broke. When someone praises them, yes, you are the richest. It doesn't bring relief, it brings fear.
Because they know it's a lie. They think, they must be mocking me. They're just waiting for me to slip up.
Exactly. The claimant is painfully aware that the recognition was demanded, it was pressured, it wasn't earned through actual success. And that lack of genuine legitimacy puts them in this state of constant, heightened alert. So every diplomatic meeting isn't an opportunity, it's a risk. The question stops being a question and becomes
A loyalty test.
a loyalty test, a litmus test to see just how much the world is willing to play along.
Okay, so we've got the psychology behind the demand. Now let's look at the response, specifically the very careful, very delicate dance performed by Japan. Beijing is always hammering them about the 1972 Sino-Japanese joint communique. What exactly is in that document that makes it so contentious?
Right, that 1972 communique is the bedrock of the modern relationship, and Article 3 is the key. In it, the People's Republic of China is crystal clear. It reaffirms its stance. Taiwan is an inalienable part of the PRC. That's the foundation they always go back to.
But Japan's wording, Japan's part of that deal is a masterclass in saying something without really saying anything.
It truly is. It's a masterpiece of strategic ambiguity. The text says Japan fully understands and respects China's position, and it adds that it adheres to the Potsdam Declaration. That specific phrasing is the source of all the friction.
Understands and respects. Let's just sit with that for a second. Why is that phrase so maddening for one side but so perfect for the other?
Because in the world of diplomacy and international law, understand and respect is not recognize, not even close. To recognize a claim is to give it legal validity. You're endorsing it. To understand and respect it, well, you're just acknowledging that the other person believes it.
So it's like, if my friend is wearing a fake Rolex, I can say, I understand and respect your belief that that is a genuine timepiece.
Exactly. You're being polite. You're acknowledging their claim. You're not causing a fight, but you are absolutely not certifying that the watch is real.
So it's the ultimate diplomatic sidestep. It's polite, it avoids conflict, but it's legally non-binding. Japan is basically saying, we hear you, we know this matters to you, but we're not co-signing the loan.
Correct. It creates this very useful gray zone. Beijing wants the black and white clarity of recognition, and Japan gives them shades of gray, which protects its own interests.
And they tie this back to the Potsdam Declaration. Now, for those of us who aren't history buffs, why is a document from the end of World War II so important here?
It's Japan's legal escape hatch. The Potsdam Declaration laid out the terms of Japan's surrender. It said Japanese sovereignty would be limited to its main islands. And crucially, as part of that, Japan officially gave up all its claims to Taiwan.
Okay, so they relinquished their claim.
Yes. But here's the key distinction.
Yeah.
When Japan gave up its claim, it did not transfer that sovereignty to anyone else. It just stopped being theirs.
So Japan's logic is, we don't own it anymore. And because we don't own it, we don't have the legal right to decide who does own it now.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredibly clever.
It's the precise logic. They're saying we have no legal standing here, so we can't and we won't take a formal position on who the current owner is. And that maintains the status quo, which is what's most important for Japan.
Okay, but why not just pick a side? Why not just agree with Beijing to get them off their back? Or, on the flip side, why not just recognize Taiwan? Why live in this stressful gray area?
Because the cost of clarity, as analyses from places like Bloomberg show, is just way too high. Japan is on an incredibly narrow tightrope.
Okay.
On one side, you have massive, deeply intertwined economic ties with China, supply chains, trade. It's huge. Siding with Taiwan would put all of that at immediate risk. That's the poking the bear side of things.
Yeah, on the other side.
On the other side, you have critical national interests tied directly to Taiwan. Semiconductor industry, for one. Key shipping lanes that are their economic lifeblood. And, of course, their security alliance with the United States.
So if they side with Beijing, they'd risk all of that.
They'd risk losing essential economic and security partnerships. So this ambiguity isn't a sign of weakness, it's a defense mechanism. It's actively protecting their own national interests by refusing to be boxed in.
And you can actually see this playing out when the diplomatic pressure from Beijing gets turned up.
Yes, there's an observable trend. The Financial Times has reported on this. When China gets more aggressive, Japan and other Western nations, they pivot. They consciously shift the conversation away from the question of sovereignty.
And what do they talk about instead?
They start emphasizing the importance of maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
So they replace the topic of ownership, which is the conflict, with the topic of behavior, which is what they want to control.
That's the strategic antibody response, you could call it. It's the international community saying, look, your historical claims are noted, but our overriding priority is preventing a war. And ironically, Beijing sees this focus on peace as an unwanted internationalization of what they insist is a purely domestic issue.
Okay, we've covered the psychology and the diplomacy. Now for the thought experiment. Let's push this to its logical extreme. What if the whole world just says yes?
Total hyper-compliance.
Total compliance. Every country, every corporation, the UN, all issue statements. Congratulations, it's all yours. What happens the next day?
Well, the first thing that happens is a complete collapse of meaning. You get immediate semantic inflation.
Explain that. What is semantic inflation?
The word sovereignty only has power because it implies exclusivity. It means you have authority over this specific territory and no one else does.
Right.
But if, in our experiment, the world agrees Taiwan is China's, and then also agrees the U.S. is China's, and Australia is China's, and Mars is China's, then the word China ceases to mean anything specific. It loses its power.
It's like that old linguistics experiment, right?
Yeah.
If you say a word over and over again, it just becomes a meaningless sound.
That's semantic satiation, and this is the political version of it. Sovereignty needs borders to have meaning. If everything is A, then A defines nothing at all.
So the very exclusivity they were fighting for vanishes the moment they achieve it universally.
It's completely diluted, which leads to the next stage, the collapse of power through overcompliance. See, power actually needs a little bit of resistance to be felt. Resistance validates its strength.
If you push against a wall, you feel strong. You push against thin air, you just fall over.
Perfect analogy. Now imagine that absurdity we talked about. If NASA holds a press conference and announces, Mars has been an inalienable part of China since ancient times.
Beijing wouldn't be celebrating. They'd be panicking.
They would have to issue an immediate angry denial. They would probably protest to the U.S. government.
But why? Why protest to victory?
Because that level of compliance signals that the entire international system has broken down. It means all the rules are gone. Treaties, borders, property rights, all the stable frameworks that Beijing also depends on for its own security and trade. They're all gone.
So if the U.S. is now China, then every trade deal is void. Every border is meaningless. It's chaos.
Total, unpredictable chaos. And they fear that chaos far more than they desire the empty title of owner of everything. They need the system to exist so they can push against its boundaries. A total win is actually a catastrophic loss.
Wow. So they need the world to resist just enough to make their struggle feel real.
And this leads to the psychological part, the paranoia of forced compliance. Because when you finally get that total unbelievable yes, you don't feel more secure, you feel less safe.
Because you know it wasn't earned, you know it was given under duress, or maybe as a joke.
Right. It forces you into this heightened, alert state. You're constantly suspicious. Why did they agree so easily? Is this a trap? You have to start watching to see if Japan will suddenly change the color back on their maps tomorrow. The recognition itself becomes the source of a whole new anxiety.
Okay, this is where it gets real. We have to move this from abstract language, from psychology, to the cold, hard reality of what ownership actually means. It's not just flying a flag. It is a crushing, massive, and probably unpayable bill.
This is the ultimate test. It's where the rubber meets the road.
So if the world stops the diplomatic games and just says, congratulations, it's yours, here's the bill, what's the first invoice that lands on their desk?
The very first package delivered is labeled the nuclear waste test.
Oh, wow.
It's a powerful, non-negotiable, and very tangible liability. The second, Taiwan is legally and officially domestic, then all of it spent nuclear fuel. Specifically, the stuff stored on Orchid Island or La Nuna, that immediately becomes China's domestic nuclear waste.
And they would be legally responsible for it.
Immediately. Under their own laws and international treaties, they would have to find a way to transport it and dispose of it safely, probably in a place like Gansu or Inner Mongolia, which are already dealing with their own environmental burdens.
You can't talk your way out of radioactive waste. We're no longer in the realm of historical maps. We're in logistics. And the internal political backlash of having to take on someone else's nuclear problem would be enormous.
And that's just the start. The financial costs are staggering.
Yeah.
We have to look at the data on Taiwan's social welfare systems.
These are huge cradle-to-grave programs, right? Like their national health insurance.
Exactly. And their labor insurance. These are incredibly popular, politically essential systems, and they run massive deficits. They require constant, multi-billion-dollar government bailouts every year just to stay afloat.
So those deficits would suddenly appear on Beijing's balance sheet.
Instantly. They would be merged into the PRC's central budget, which is already under immense stress.
How bad is the existing debt situation?
It's a huge systemic risk. By some estimates, China's local government debt is approaching $9 trillion US. Adding Taiwan's massive social welfare black hole on top of that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It could trigger a major internal financial crisis.
And we've seen this before, right? The cost of absorbing another territory, the German reunification.
The German example is the best one we have, and the scale is just mind-boggling. West Germany paid over 2 trillion euros to absorb the much smaller, much poorer East Germany.
2 trillion.
And that money went into everything. Infrastructure, pensions, environmental cleanup, bringing the East up to the standards of the West.
And the gap between, say, the PRC's legal and social systems and Taiwan's is arguably even wider.
Much wider. The real cost of a true systemic integration would make the German bill look small.
Okay, what about the crown jewel, TSMC? In domestic media, they often talk about it like it's already a Chinese enterprise. What's the cost of that ownership?
This is the ultimate paradox. The bill for owning TSMC is the destruction of TSMC.
How?
The second it formally becomes China TSMC, a few things happen. First, Beijing is on the hook for all its R&D subsidies and any global patent lawsuits. But the killer is this. It would face immediate and comprehensive U.S. sanctions.
How fast would that destroy its value?
Overnight. The U.S. export controls are designed specifically to stop companies controlled by the PRC from getting essential technology. So China TSMC would instantly be cut off from American equipment, from essential design software, even from global talent.
So the company would just stop working, at least at the high end.
It would be rendered inoperable. The very thing that makes it valuable, its global integration and access to the best technology, is the very thing that would be destroyed the moment they took control.
Right.
They can't have both.
So they can only have the symbolic pride of the claim, because actually control means the asset becomes worthless.
Precisely. And that's before you even get to the military and governance liabilities, absorbing an entire active military. You'd have to pay their pensions, maintain their bases, deal with massive command confusion, It's a financial and security nightmare.
But you're saying the biggest liability of all isn't financial.
No. The single biggest, most existential liability is the society itself. Taiwan's vibrant, demanding, highly critical democratic culture that would overwhelm a system built on weiwen, on stability maintenance.
For that system of governance, a sophisticated, engaged civil society isn't an asset. It's a virus.
It's a fatal virus, and so the experiment shows us the truth. What is really being sought is virtual territorial completeness, the pride, the map color, without bearing the real social burden, the debt, the waste, and 23 million educated citizens who expect to have a voice.
All of this, it leads us to a really critical and, frankly, dark way of looking at this whole thing. Let's talk about the basement theory.
Right. This theory suggests that the logic eventually shifts away from just making a claim to demanding total control. It's what some critics call the deadly embrace.
And the logic of the basement is?
The logic is, if I cannot effectively communicate with her, her being the democracy, the free society, then I will simply lock her up. The goal is no longer to persuade or to govern, but to neutralize the problem.
To manage it as a confined space rather than engaging with it as a free society.
And the transaction is crucial here. The promise is always, I'll send down food. These are the economic benefits, the Huitai policies. Economic opportunity is offered, but the price is the surrender of political freedom. It's an authoritarian contract.
But the irony is it's overwhelming. The food, Taiwan's economic power, its tech leadership, it was all created by the girl herself through her free engagement with the outside world.
Exactly. The very act of locking her in the basement severs those international ties. It destroys the very source of the food you're promising to provide. The value of the asset is destroyed by the act of possessing it.
This reminds me of the controlling boyfriend analogy, this idea of a selfish, deresponsibilized love.
It's the essence of what you could call harvest-style sovereignty. The attitude is, she is mine, so I don't care about her mental health, meaning her democracy. I don't care about her debt, the social deficits, and I certainly don't care about her friends, her alliances with the US and Japan.
It's a desire for selective ownership. You want the assets, the geography, the tech, but you want to neutralize the complex, messy, expensive society that created them.
And the most critical insight is that this basement logic isn't just for external policy. It's a mirror of the internal social contract on the mainland itself.
So you're saying the mainland population is already living under a version of this contract?
That's what the analysis from human rights groups and others suggests. There's a fundamental exchange. The people give up freedom of information, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Those are the walls of the basement.
And in return, they get the food, state-led economic growth, and stability.
The entire legitimacy of the system rests on the continuous delivery of that food.
But what happens when the food starts to run out? When the economy slows down, youth unemployment spikes.
This is the fatal flaw in the model. When the food becomes scarce, the walls have to get thicker, the locks have to get heavier, the state has to rely more and more on control, not prosperity.
And so that constant loud demand for external respect and recognition.
It becomes a facade, a massive distraction designed to justify the internal sacrifice and the tightening grip. It's a way to manage internal instability by focusing everyone's attention outward.
And there's data that shows the primary fear is internal, not external.
Absolutely. For years now, the budget for WEI, for internal stability maintenance, that's domestic security, surveillance, police, that budget has been larger than the official military budget.
Wow.
That's the hard data. It proves where the deepest fear lies. It's not about a foreign invasion. It's about the girl escaping the basement. They are spending far more money locking the door from the inside than they are guarding the borders from the outside.
Well, that was an incredibly detailed and I think very provocative conversation. We've gone from the psychology of the repetitive question to the fine art of diplomatic evasion, all the way to the staggering real-world cost of ownership.
And the central paradox is just so clear, isn't it? The sovereignty anxiety, it's fueled by that ever-widening gap between the claim on paper and the reality on the ground. The louder they shout, the less control they actually have.
And when you push them to accept the real responsibilities, the nuclear waste, the debt, the democratic society, the claim starts to look a lot less attractive.
The placebo of language can never heal the wound of reality.
And as we always say here, our goal is simply to provide some different frameworks, some critical analysis for understanding these incredibly complex issues. We're not here to criticize any one nation or people, but just to uphold a standard of independent thinking and ask the hard questions about power.
And we'll leave all of you with one final thought, building on that basement theory. If your definition of happiness or stability requires confinement and silence, can you truly call it happiness? A truly strong family, a truly secure nation. It's not afraid to leave the door unlocked.
To everyone listening, if you ever feel isolated or trapped in your own kind of basement, please remember your value isn't defined by those who want to contain you. You are not a possession. Your voice matters.
Keep thinking. Keep questioning. No lock can ever truly contain a free mind. The moment you start to question the narrative you've been given, that's the moment the walls start to crumble.
And if you enjoy this conversation, please be sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your audio. We really do value your time and your thoughts.
And please also check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life. He's got some great memes and fantastic travel vlogs. You won't regret it.
Until next time.